The massive council chamber buzzed with fear and panic as alien representatives from across the galaxy gathered for an emergency meeting. Admiral Veltar, a tall blue-skinned creature with 4 arms, stood at the center of the room looking at the holographic displays showing destruction beyond imagination. The reports were all the same. Entire star systems had vanished in just a few days. "The Void Swarm has returned," Veltar announced, his voice heavy with dread. Duh. The chamber erupted in terrified chatter. Species that had lived peacefully for thousands of years suddenly faced something they had only heard about in ancient legends. The Void Swarm was not alive in any way the galaxy understood life. It was a mechanical plague that swept through space like a disease, consuming everything in its path. Planets, stars, ships, and people, nothing could escape its hunger. The swarm converted matter into more of itself, growing stronger with each world it devoured. Veltar pulled up tactical reports from their best military commanders. Fleet after fleet had been sent to stop the swarm, but none had returned. The most advanced warships in the galaxy, equipped with weapons that could destroy entire moons, had been wiped out in minutes. The enemy moved with perfect coordination, as if millions of mechanical units shared a single deadly mind. "Sir, what about the defense grid around the core worlds?" asked Commander Zephyr, an insect-like being whose species had served as the galaxy's military advisors for centuries. "Gone," Veltar replied grimly. "The swarm broke through our strongest defenses like they were made of paper. At this rate, we have maybe weeks before they reach the capital systems." The reality hit everyone in the chamber at once. This was not just another war that could be won with superior technology or clever tactics. This was extinction. The Void Swarm had appeared once before in galactic history, nearly 10,000 years ago, and had almost succeeded in consuming all life in the galaxy. It had taken the combined efforts of every species to barely drive it back into the dark spaces between stars. But now the galaxy was different. The species had grown soft during the long peace. They had forgotten how to fight desperately, how to make the hard choices that survival demanded. Their weapons were designed for quick, clean victories against civilized enemies, not against a mechanical plague that felt no fear and accepted no surrender. "There must be something we can do," pleaded Ambassador Katara, her tentacles writhing. "With anxiety, some weapon, some strategy we haven't tried." Veltar looked around the chamber at faces filled with hope and desperation. He had spent his entire career protecting the galaxy, but now he faced a truth that terrified him more than the approaching swarm. The civilized species of the galaxy had become too peaceful, too refined to fight something this brutal and relentless. That's when he remembered something from the restricted files, something the Council had tried to forget. His 4 hands moved across the control panel, accessing records that had been sealed for decades. The holographic display changed, showing a small yellow star on the edge of known space, surrounded by warning beacons. "There is one option," Veltar said slowly, "but it requires us to break our most sacred law." The chamber fell silent as the representatives recognized the star. System on the display. Sol, the quarantined zone where humanity had been trapped for 30 years after their first contact with galactic civilization had gone horribly wrong. "Can't be serious," whispered Commander Zephyr. "Humans are monsters. We exiled them for good reason." "Humans are Deathworlders," Veltar corrected. "They come from a planet so dangerous that it breeds creatures capable of unimaginable violence. But maybe that's exactly what we need now." The Council had made the decision to quarantine humanity after witnessing their brutal efficiency in combat. Where other species sought diplomatic solutions, humans resorted to violence with shocking speed. They seemed to enjoy conflict in ways that civilized beings found disturbing. Their planet Earth was a nightmare world, where survival required constant struggle against predators, disasters, and each other. "Protocol Omega," Veltar announced. "We activate the emergency beacon." The ancient protocol had been created as a last resort, a way to call for help when all other options were exhausted. It hadn't been used in over 1,000 years because the galaxy had believed it would never again face total extinction. The beacon would send a distress signal to Sol, breaking the quarantine and asking the monsters they had exiled to save them, with shaking hands. Altar entered the activation codes. The beacon came online, sending a desperate message across the void toward Earth. The signal carried with it the Council's pride, their fear, and their hope that the species they had once rejected might be their salvation, deep beneath the mountains of Colorado. Admiral Minho Park was reviewing routine patrol reports when the communication array suddenly came alive with an incoming signal. The transmission was unlike anything they had received in 30 years, clearly alien in origin. But using old diplomatic channels that hadn't been active since humanity's exile from galactic civilization, the message was broken and filled with static. But the automated translation systems managed to piece together the terrifying truth. The void swarm had returned, and the galaxy was dying. Entire star systems were being consumed by mechanical death, and the same aliens who had banished humanity were now sending desperate pleas for help. "Hey, sir, this has to be some kind of trick," said Captain Juan Kim, her face pale as she studied the decoded message. "They threw us out, called us monsters, and now they want our help." Minho had been a young officer during humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council. He remembered the hope his people had felt when they learned they weren't alone in the universe. He also remembered the crushing disappointment when the aliens had declared Earth a quarantine zone, sealing humanity away from the stars he had dreamed of exploring. The official reason had been humanity's excessive aggression and incompatibility with civilized society. In reality, the aliens had been terrified by humanity's capacity for violence and their willingness to use it without hesitation. When space pirates had attacked the first diplomatic meeting, the human security team had responded with lethal force that shocked the peaceful alien delegates. "They're scared of us," Minho said quietly, watching the tactical displays that showed the swarm's unstoppable advance. "But now they're more scared of dying." The transmission included fragmentary tactical data about the enemy. The Void Swarm wasn't just a military threat, it was a mechanical plague that converted matter into more of itself. It had already consumed dozens of worlds, and the galaxy's most advanced fleets had been wiped out in minutes. The peaceful species that had rejected humanity's warrior nature were now facing an enemy that only understood destruction. "What are your orders, sir?" asked Commander Woojin Lee, the head of Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Division. "Do we ignore this? Let them face the consequences of their choices." Minho looked around the command center at the faces of men and women who had spent their entire careers preparing for a war that never came. Earth's military had grown stronger during the years of isolation, driven by the knowledge that they were alone in a hostile universe. They had reverse-engineered alien technology, improved upon it, and created weapons that no civilized species would ever consider building. "How many innocent people are out there?" Minho asked, pointing at the star charts showing the galaxy beyond their solar system. How many children, families, entire worlds that had nothing to do with the Council's decision to exile us? The answer was obvious. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and humanity was apparently the only species capable of fighting back against the mechanical plague. It's the same traits that had made them outcasts, their aggression, their willingness to accept casualties. Their refusal to surrender might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. "Signal all hidden bases," Minho ordered. "Emergency mobilization. I want every ship, every crew, every weapon we've built over the past 30 years, ready for deployment." Throughout the solar system, humanity's secret fleet began to emerge from concealed bases, ships hidden in asteroid belts, underground facilities on Mars. And orbital stations disguised as research platforms suddenly revealed their true purpose. For 3 decades, humanity had been preparing for the day they might need to defend themselves against a galaxy that feared them. The vessels that emerged were unlike anything in the known galaxy, where alien ships were elegant and efficient. Human warships were brutal and functional. They were built to take damage and keep fighting. It's designed by a species that understood that survival sometimes required accepting terrible losses. "Sir, the fleet is ready," reported Captain Jiwon Kim. "All crews are at battle stations." Minho nodded, watching as hundreds of human warships took position around Earth. The aliens had called them monsters and exiled them from civilized space. Now those same monsters were about to become the galaxy's only hope for survival. "Launch the fleet," he commanded. "It's time to show the universe what Deathworlders can really do." As the massive human fleet moved into formation around Earth, Admiral Minho Park found himself thinking about the day that changed everything. 30 years ago, humanity had been so excited about first contact with alien life. The entire world had celebrated when the Galactic Council agreed to meet with Earth's representatives at a neutral space station. Commander Sun-Ho Lee had been chosen to lead the human delegation. He was a perfect choice, intelligent, diplomatic, and experienced. In dealing with different cultures, what the selection committee hadn't considered was that Sun-Ho, like all humans, had been shaped by millions of years of evolution on a world where everything tried to kill you. Earth wasn't like other planets in the galaxy. Most alien worlds were peaceful gardens where intelligent life had evolved slowly without major threats. But Earth was different. Humans had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, and countless predators. They had learned to fight not just for resources, but for their very existence. The first contact meeting had started well. Alien delegates were fascinated by human culture and impressed by Earth's technological progress. Representatives from dozens of peaceful species gathered in the station's main conference room, eager to welcome humanity into galactic civilization. They saw humans as curious creatures from a slightly more dangerous world than usual. Then the pirates attacked. The space station's alarms screamed as unknown ships appeared from hyperspace and began firing on the diplomatic vessel. These weren't military ships. They were raiders looking for valuable cargo and easy targets. The alien delegates had never experienced anything like this. Their species had evolved past warfare centuries ago, and they had no idea how to respond. To sudden violence? "Get down. Everyone on the floor." Sun-Ho had shouted, but the aliens didn't understand. They stood frozen in terror as the station shook under enemy fire. Some began to cry, others simply stared in shock at the flashing emergency lights. But Sun-Ho didn't freeze. His training kicked in immediately. While the aliens cowered behind tables, he was already moving, coordinating with the small human security team that had accompanied the delegation. It brought weapons, something that had made the aliens uncomfortable from the beginning. "Hostile boarding craft detected," announced the station's computer system. "Hull breach in Section 7. The pirates were coming aboard, armed and ready to take prisoners for ransom. In the civilized galaxy, this kind of thing simply didn't happen. The alien delegates had no protocols for dealing with armed enemies, no training for combat situations, and no weapons to defend themselves. "Stay here and keep quiet," Sun-Ho told the alien representatives. "We'll handle this." What happened next would haunt human-alien relations for decades. Sun-Ho led his security team through the station's corridors, hunting the pirates with deadly efficiency. They used tactics that would have been familiar to any human military unit: quick strikes, coordinated attacks, and lethal force without hesitation. The pirates expected easy victims, but they found themselves facing creatures that had evolved to be perfect predators. Humans could track enemies through darkened corridors, fight effectively in zero gravity, and make split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death within 20 minutes. The pirate threat was eliminated. Every single raider was dead, their bodies scattered throughout the station. Sun-Ho's team had taken no prisoners, shown no mercy, used violence that shocked even the hardened space criminals. When the aliens found the aftermath, they were horrified. The corridors were filled with the bodies of enemies who had been killed with brutal efficiency. The humans had used knives, bare hands, and improvised weapons alongside their firearms. It wasn't just fighting, it was hunting. "Could you do this?" asked Ambassador Valkyrie, a peaceful being whose species had never known war. They were surrendering. "No, they weren't," Sun-Ho replied calmly. "They were regrouping for another attack. We eliminated the threat. The aliens couldn't understand this logic. In their experience, conflicts were resolved through negotiation and compromise. Violence was a last resort, used only when absolutely necessary and with great reluctance. But humans had responded to danger with immediate, overwhelming force. The Galactic Council's decision came quickly. Humanity was declared too dangerous for civilized space. Earth was placed under quarantine, surrounded by warning beacons that prevented any ships from entering or leaving the solar system. The same species that had been grateful for human protection now feared what those protectors might do to them. "Save their lives," Minho remembered his predecessor saying, "and they punished us for it." The irony wasn't lost on him. The aliens had rejected humanity because they were too violent, too quick to fight, too willing to use deadly force. Now those same aliens were begging for help against an enemy that could only be stopped by the very qualities they had found so terrifying. 30 years of isolation had made humanity stronger, not weaker. They had used the time to develop better weapons, improved tactics, and more effective strategies. The galaxy had intended the quarantine as punishment, but it had become humanity's greatest advantage. The darkness of space had hidden Earth's secret for too long. Now, humanity's greatest weapon was about to reveal itself to an unsuspecting galaxy. The human fleet moved like a shadow through the void, carrying with it the fury of a species that had been abandoned and forgotten. Captain Hyanam stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars streak past as his ship led the massive formation. Behind him stretched a line of vessels that would have terrified any alien engineer who truly understood what they were seeing. These weren't just ships. They were floating fortresses built by a species that had learned to survive in the most hostile environment imaginable. The human vessels looked nothing like the sleek, graceful ships favored by other galactic civilizations. Where alien technology prioritized efficiency and elegance, human engineering embraced a different philosophy entirely. Every human ship was a testament to redundancy, built with multiple backup systems for every critical function. Their hulls were thick and scarred, designed not to avoid damage but to absorb it and keep fighting. Admiral Park's voice crackled through the communication systems, reaching every ship in the vast armada. His words carried the weight of decades of isolation and the burning desire for recognition that had driven humanity to this moment. The galaxy had made its choice when it cast Earth aside, treating humans like dangerous animals that needed to be contained. Now those same humans were returning to show exactly what they had become during their exile. Commander. Unichoi felt the familiar weight of command as she reviewed the tactical displays in her assault division. Her ships were loaded with boarding, teams trained in combat techniques that most civilized species had outlawed centuries ago. The weapons her fleet carried were designed with a brutality that reflected humanity's Deathworld origins. While other races had evolved beyond such crude methods, humans had perfected them. The first target system appeared on the long-range sensors, already partially consumed by the swarm that had been spreading across the galaxy like a plague. Alien civilizations had proven helpless against this threat. Their elegant ships and refined tactics, useless against an enemy that knew only hunger and reproduction, brought the swarm had never encountered anything like humanity before, as the human fleet approached the infected system. Something became clear to every crew member aboard those scarred vessels. They weren't just soldiers or explorers. They were evolution's answer to a problem the galaxy couldn't solve. Earth had forged them in fire and pressure, creating a species that thrived on conflict and adapted to every challenge. The Deathworld fleet had finally awakened from its long slumber. Every ship in the formation carried the collective anger of a species that had been judged and found wanting by those who had never faced real hardship. Now, as they prepared to engage an enemy that had brought the galaxy to its knees, humanity would demonstrate the true value of being forged in the crucible of a world that tried to kill them every single day. The galaxy would learn what monsters could truly accomplish. When they were finally unleashed, the Kepler 442 system had become a graveyard of twisted metal and dying stars. What had once been a thriving Council research station now existed only as scattered debris floating through the void. The void swarm had done what it always did, consumed everything in its path, and left nothing but emptiness behind. Admiral Velter's remaining ships hung at the edge of the system, her crews watching in stunned silence as the mechanical plague continued its endless feast. His fleet had arrived too late to save the research station, and now they could only observe as the swarm prepared to move on to its next target. The crystalline entities moved with a coordination that defied understanding, each unit perfectly synchronized with the collective whole. Then something impossible happened. New contacts appeared on the long-range sensors, approaching the system at speeds that shouldn't have been possible for vessels of their size. Veltar stared at his displays, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The approaching fleet was massive, composed of ships that looked like nothing in the galactic database. "Sir, they're not slowing down," his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with disbelief. "They're heading straight for the swarm." Veltar watched in amazement. As the unknown vessels continued their approach without any sign of hesitation, every other species in the galaxy had learned to fear the void swarm, to retreat the moment those crystalline forms appeared on sensors. But these ships were different. They moved with purpose, as if they were hunting rather than fleeing. "Captain." Huan stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, his eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the swarm's formation. His crew worked with quiet efficiency around him, their movements precise and deadly. Where other species saw an unstoppable force of destruction, Nam saw something entirely different. His predator-trained mind recognized patterns in the swarms. Behavior, weaknesses that could be exploited by someone willing to get close enough. The mechanical entities pulsed with energy, their crystalline matrices glowing as they prepared to face this new threat. They had consumed countless civilizations, each one falling to their perfect coordination and overwhelming numbers. But the swarm had never encountered anything like humanity before. They had never faced a species that had been forged in the fires of a world that tried to kill them every single day. "All ships, target the central nodes." Nam's voice carried across the fleet communications with deadly calm. "And remember, we're not here to run, we're here to hunt." The human fleet opened fire with weapons that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive. Decades ago, railguns launched projectiles at incredible speeds, while missile systems filled the space between the fleets with explosions of raw kinetic force. Where alien civilizations had developed elegant energy weapons, humans had perfected the art of hurling metal at their enemies with devastating effect. The swarm's defenses, designed to deflect the sophisticated energy weapons of advanced civilizations, proved useless against humanity's crude but effective approach. The mechanical plague had never encountered prey that fought back with such raw ferocity. It treated them not as an unstoppable force, but as just another predator to be hunted and killed, for the first time in its existence. The void swarm faced an enemy that refused to be consumed. The space around Kepler 442 erupted into chaos as the human fleet engaged the void swarm in ways that defied every principle of civilized warfare. What the galaxy witnessed next would challenge everything they thought they knew about combat, sacrifice, and the true nature of survival. Captain Salman Park watched her cruiser's hull buckle under the swarm's relentless assault, alarms blaring, as system after system went offline. Her ship was dying, but Park saw something her alien counterparts would never have recognized: opportunity. Before other species would have ordered evacuation or attempted retreat, Park made a decision that would have been unthinkable to any civilized commander. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered calmly, even as she remained at her post. "Emergency evacuation in 60 seconds. But Park had no intention of abandoning her vessel. As her crew escaped to nearby ships, she manually overrode the reactors, safety systems, and aimed her crippled cruiser directly at the densest concentration of swarm entities. The explosion that followed carved a massive gap in the mechanical formation, creating an opening that human tactical doctrine had been designed to exploit. Admiral Veltar watched this display of apparent madness from his observation post, his Balakta alien mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. "They're sacrificing themselves," he whispered to his tactical officer, his voice filled with disbelief. No rational species would accept such casualties. What Veltar couldn't understand was that humans weren't being irrational at all. Every apparent sacrifice was calculated. Every loss served a strategic purpose. This was Deathworld thinking at its finest, the ability to see opportunity and devastation in turn, destruction into advantage. Commander Taeon proved this point as he led his boarding parties through the wreckage of both human and swarm vessels. His teams moved through the debris field with practiced ease, using the twisted metal and floating rubble as cover while they launched their assault on the mechanical entities. They fought in zero gravity with a skill that no other species possessed, their movements fluid and deadly in an environment that would have paralyzed most civilized soldiers. The swarm had evolved to fight enemies that maintained formation, that retreated when damaged, that valued preservation over victory. But humans had learned different lessons on their hostile homeworld. They had mastered the art of fighting in broken terrain, of turning disaster into tactical advantage, pressing forward when every instinct screamed for retreat. Commander Unichoi's assault teams exemplified this philosophy as they carved their way through the swarm's vessels. Using techniques that seemed impossible to outside observers, they adapted to each new challenge with frightening speed, improvising solutions to problems that would have required hours of planning for other species. When corridors were blocked, they cut new paths. When gravity failed, they fought in 3 dimensions. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they found new ways to kill. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as these supposedly primitive humans accomplished what their most advanced civilizations could not. The same species that had been dismissed as barbaric monsters was systematically dismantling a threat that had brought the entire galactic community to its knees. For the first time since the Void Swarm had appeared, the mechanical plague was not just being contained, it was being defeated. The Death World had finally sent its children to war, and the universe would never be the same. The victory at Kepler 442 sent shockwaves through the galaxy that reached far beyond the immediate battlefield. Word spread quickly through the surviving alien fleets that something impossible had happened. The Void Swarm had not just been stopped, but actually defeated. For the first time since the mechanical plague had begun its rampage across civilized space, there was hope. Human commanders wasted no time capitalizing on their success. They moved from system to system with methodical precision, establishing footholds in territories that had been written off as lost causes. Where other species had fled in terror, human forces dug in and fought with a tenacity that amazed their alien observers. They turned debris fields into fortified positions, used damaged stations as bases of operations, and somehow found ways to fight effectively in environments that would have been considered uninhabitable by galactic standards. Captain Juan Kim found herself in the unusual position of teacher as desperate alien commanders reached out for guidance. Her communication channels buzzed with requests for tactical advice from species who had previously refused to acknowledge Earth's existence. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same civilizations that had cast humanity aside were now begging for help from the monsters they had created. "Fight like your world depends on it," Kim told them during one of many strategy briefings, her voice carrying across multiple fleet networks, because it does. The lesson was simple, but profound. These alien species had grown comfortable in their advanced civilizations, protected by technology and diplomacy from the harsh realities of survival. They had forgotten what it meant to face extinction with nothing but determination and the will to keep fighting. Humanity had never been allowed to forget. Admiral Minho Park transformed his flagship into a mobile command center, coordinating an alliance that would have been impossible just months earlier. His staff worked around the clock, teaching civilized species to think like the predators they had once been millions of years ago. The training was brutal and often traumatic for aliens who had never experienced real hardship. But it was effective. Human engineers shared their weapons technology freely, showing alien manufacturers how to build railguns and missile systems that could punch through swarm defenses. More importantly, they taught their new allies to embrace redundancy over elegance, to value effectiveness over efficiency. The galaxy's survivors began to understand that sometimes crude solutions were exactly what impossible problems required. System by system, the tide of war began to turn. The Void Swarm's perfect coordination, which had seemed so unstoppable against organized resistance, proved vulnerable to humanity's chaotic adaptability. The mechanical entities had been programmed to counter predictable tactics and logical strategies. They had never encountered a species that thrived on improvisation and grew stronger through conflict. Each battle taught the human fleet something new about their mechanical enemies, and each lesson was immediately shared with their alien allies. The swarm's hive mind mentality, which had been their greatest strength, became a weakness when faced with opponents who refused to follow any predictable pattern. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the universe needed monsters to fight monsters, and humanity, forged in the fires of a world that had tried to kill them every single day, is exactly the kind of monster the situation demanded. The intelligence reports had been clear but terrifying. Deep at the galaxy's edge, beyond the reach of most civilized sensors, lay the source of the Void Swarm's power, a massive construct that defied understanding, pulsing with alien energy and coordinating the mechanical plague's every move. If the war was to end, that construct had to be destroyed. Admiral Minho Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final preparations for what everyone knew would be humanity's greatest test. The assembled fleet stretched out before him, a mixture of human vessels and alien ships that had learned to fight like their Deathworld allies. But even with their combined strength, the odds were overwhelming. The construct ahead of them was larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, its surface crawling with defensive systems that had been perfected over countless millennia. Swarm entities moved around it in patterns too complex for most minds to comprehend. Creating a defensive wall that had never been breached, Park understood the magnitude of what they were attempting. This wasn't just another battle. It was the final gamble of species that had been driven to the edge of extinction. As he gave the order to advance, he couldn't help but reflect on the cruel irony of their situation. The same exile that had been meant to protect the galaxy from humanity's violent nature had instead created the only force capable of saving it. All ships, final approach. Park's voice carried across the fleet communications with steady determination. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who couldn't. The human fleet moved forward into a storm of defensive fire that would have shattered any conventional assault. Ships were destroyed within seconds of entering the construct's range, their crews accepting death as the price of creating openings for their comrades. This was Deathworld thinking at its most brutal. The understanding that sometimes victory required sacrifices that no civilized species could contemplate. Commander Unichoi led her assault teams through the breach that had been carved by countless sacrifices. Her soldiers moved through the construct's corridors with practiced efficiency, engaging mechanical drones in combat that combined human ferocity with alien technology. Every meter of progress costs lives, but they pressed forward with the relentless determination that had carried humanity through millennia of survival on a hostile world. Captain Yon Nam's ship took devastating damage as it covered the boarding. Teams advance. His vessel's hull cracked and systems failed. But Nam kept his weapons firing until the moment his ship was completely destroyed. His final act was to ram his crippled vessel into a critical support structure, creating the opening that choice teams needed to reach the core intelligence. The construct's inner chambers revealed the true horror of the Void Swarm, a mechanical mind so vast and complex that it had consumed entire star systems to power its thoughts. But for all its perfection and alien sophistication, it had never encountered anything like human determination. As the core intelligence fell silent under the assault of humanity's finest warriors, something unprecedented happened. The Void Swarm, which had never known defeat in its eons of existence, began to retreat. The mechanical plague that had brought the galaxy to its knees was finally withdrawing into the darkness from which it emerged. The Deathworld had saved the galaxy by doing what it did best, surviving the impossible, the silence that followed the void. Swarm's defeat was more profound than any sound the galaxy had ever heard. Across countless star systems, the mechanical plague's retreat left behind a universe fundamentally changed. The species that had once cowered in fear now faced a reality they weren't prepared to accept. Their salvation had come from the very people they had cast aside. In the rebuilt chambers of the Galactic Council, representatives from surviving civilizations gathered to confront an uncomfortable truth. The elegant halls that had once echoed with debates about humanity's dangerous nature now hosted a very different kind of discussion. The council members, many of whom had voted to exile Earth decades earlier, found themselves in the unprecedented position of owing their existence to the monsters they had created. The formal apology, when it came, was delivered with the kind of diplomatic precision that had once been used to justify humanity's banishment. Council Speaker Zephyrion stood before the assembled delegates. His words carefully chosen to acknowledge the debt without admitting the full scope of their error. The offer of full galactic membership was presented as a generous gesture, as if the council was doing humanity a favor rather than desperately trying to repair a relationship they had shattered. Admiral Minho Park's response was measured, but firm, his voice carrying the weight of every human who had died defending a galaxy that had rejected them. "We're not the same species you banished," he told the assembled council, his words cutting through their diplomatic facades. "We're your protectors now." The change in dynamic was unmistakable. Where once humanity had stood before the council, as supplicants begging for acceptance, they now held the position of strength. The galaxy needed them more than they needed the galaxy, and everyone in that chamber understood the implications of that shift. Captain Soman Park, who had miraculously survived her ramming attack against the swarm, found herself commanding reconstruction fleets that included vessels from dozens of different species. Her crews worked with an efficiency that amazed their alien counterparts, turning devastated worlds into thriving colonies with the same determination they had once used to fight the mechanical plague. The techniques they employed were crude by galactic standards, but they worked faster and more effectively than any sophisticated alternative. Commander, Unichoi established training academies on worlds that had been reclaimed from the swarm, teaching alien recruits the warrior skills their civilizations had forgotten. The lessons were harsh and often traumatic for species that had known only peace and prosperity, but they were necessary. The galaxy had learned that elegance and efficiency were luxuries that could only be afforded when someone else was willing to fight the real battles. As reconstruction efforts continued across the galaxy, something remarkable began to emerge from the ruins of the old order. Human and alien crews worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that bridged the gap between Deathworld pragmatism and galactic sophistication. The universe was discovering that their differences weren't weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths to be celebrated. Admiral Park stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching mixed crews work together to rebuild a space station that had been consumed by the swarm. The sight filled him with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with purpose. The galaxy had finally learned what humanity had always known, that sometimes being cast out was the greatest gift of all.